Hello, welcome to the Go for Ball podcast. Once again, I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mail. We got Sports 25 to life. We're talking about hot hitters, cold hitters, recent trends, things of that nature. We'll have our weekly Chase Utley update on his WRC Plus, which finally he got back into the black last week. We'll see where he went after a couple games in Coors this week. But we'll get to that. That's going to be the exciting moment of this here in a couple minutes. We're starting at catcher here, talking about your top hitters, who's doing well, who's not doing well. And Stephen Vogt, while he was by far the top catcher for a long time, he's still the top as far as average goes, but barely. 305, he's got 288 ISO. He's really cooled off over the past couple weeks, but he's still going a 14.8% walk rate, which is great. He's doing a great job getting on base. 423 weighted on base average. And, that Athletics lineup really hasn't been doing a whole lot recently, but Vogt's still been one of the more consistent on-base guys, I'll say, over the past couple weeks still.
Yeah, definitely. We lost another qualified catcher. I think we're down to 10 now.
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy. I mean, I remember, 10 years ago when catchers used to catch like 4 out of every 5 games at least, and now it's like
every day, the same guy.
I know, and now everything's a platoon. I mean, we got the Cubs with 3 catchers rolling out there. Oh, actually, they just traded what's-his-face, didn't they? So they're down to 2, yeah.
Yeah, he's in Seattle now.
Yeah, that's right. So that's good to see for them. I mean, it'll be nice to get Montero in there a few more times a week because he's actually been swinging a pretty good bat. He's one of the guys that's not eligible right now, and he's actually swinging a pretty solid bat. Buster Posey's the big guy for me. We've been talking about. We knew he'd come around eventually. He's up to 299 with a 362 WOBA now, which is pretty solid. He's one of those guys that doesn't have a great batting average on balls in play, but part of it's because he just doesn't strike out very much, and he's constantly putting the ball in play. He's the only qualified catcher under a 10% strikeout rate. He's at a 296 batting average on balls in play. It looks like the league average right now for this season is 311, so he still has some room for improvement there, but like I said, it's tougher to get 300 on batting average on balls in play when you're putting 90% of your balls in play, and it just makes it that much tougher because you're swinging at more pitches that people are taking for called third strikes, swinging and missing at, stuff like that. He's looked great lately. He's up to 7 home runs. We've got 3 catchers in the top 4 in batting average here, with Russell Martin being the third that are above 7 home runs. So, I mean, you're getting a lot of your production at catcher, both power and average, from those 3 guys, Vogt, Posey, and Russell Martin. And those are your leaders in runs and RBIs, too. I mean, if you're spending up a catcher, you're spending on those 3 guys most of the time. Otherwise, you're looking more at platoon guys that are saving you a lot of cap, because some of these other qualified guys are just not hitting the ball well. Like Mike Zunino, who we've mentioned a bunch, is striking out 37% of the time in 124 plate appearances still.
He's consistent, though. He's been over 35 all year.
I know, that's incredible, though. Like, 1 out of every 3 at-bats, he's just whiffing.
Yep.
And still playing almost every game, which is really impressive. It speaks to his defense quite a bit, though. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
Because he goes out there every day, calls great games, throws guys out. He's solid. A couple other guys down here that are struggling, Kurt Suzuki and Brian McCann. McCann's basically a matchup play at this point. We talk about him a couple times every week when he's facing a really weak righty. That's really the only time you can play him. He's not catching up the fastballs right now. He's not hitting good breaking pitches. Absolutely awful against lefties. He hasn't even been playing against lefties most of the time, despite being pretty decent against them over his career. So, I mean, he's just starting to drop off quite a bit. Still has a little bit of power, has 4 home runs and 22 RBI on the season, but not a guy you can really consider every day at this point in his career.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, he's a guy that you play against weak righties, and I really only play him at home, too, because of that short porch.
Mm-hmm.
He's really not a guy. I mean, he's priced like a guy who hits righties well, but when he gets a tough righty or even a bad righty on the road, he's still priced in that upper tier. I mean, near guys like Posey and Vogt and Martin, a little bit below, and it's just it's so tough to pay for him, so I'm not a fan. And like you said, Kurt Suzuki is a guy who never has had much power or anything, but usually a guy that hit for a decent average, but at 234... Really not a guy that you're looking at outside of maybe as a cash game play when he's batting like second in that Minnesota order.
Yeah, another guy that's been hitting really well lately, Yadier Molina, has raised his batting average about 50 points in the last 2 weeks. He's up to 294 now. Only a 7% walk rate, 15 RBI, no home runs. I mean, he's a guy that, as far as DFS goes, gets largely overlooked for the most part. He just doesn't have the power upside that you really want, but he's cheap. If he's going to hit around 300 with around 100 WRC plus, I mean, he's a decent play sometimes, but just not a guy you're going to target very often.
No, and I mean, he's almost minimum salary on FanDuel most nights now, so he's a nice filler when he's batting around 6 in that Cardinals order, which is they're really starting to get it going too. A couple big games recently. All right, let's move on here to first base, where, I mean, I guess we won't start at the top just because we always do, and it's always Adrian Gonzalez. But Adrian Gonzalez is still at the top. No surprise, his ISO's still over 300, batting 345. We know he's having a great year. A guy who's starting to get it going, but doing almost all of his damage during the day. If you've seen those splits, they're pretty ridiculous. Yep. Miguel Cabrera, up to 336, 10 homers, 31 RBIs, even stole a base. So get with it, Adrian Gonzalez. You're a little bit behind there. I mean, if we had a base stealing competition between these two, it would be pretty. I would pay to watch that. Actually, I'd probably pay to watch that before I'd watch a home run derby with these two guys, because that would be hilarious. But either way, he's really getting it going. And another guy who's been absolutely on fire is Anthony Rizzo. He's got 246 ISO now, up to 8 homers, 23 RBI, scored 26 runs, and there's a Cubs offense that still isn't producing at a high level. But I mean, Anthony Rizzo seems to be in the middle of it every single night.
9 stolen bases, the really surprising thing there. Yep. I mean, he could legit have a 25-25 season as a first baseman, which, I mean, when was the last time we even saw that?
Yeah, no one would have seen that from Rizzo either. I mean, there's some guys who maybe you would think would have some stolen base upside, but Rizzo is not the guy, though.
No, right. It's really surprising, honestly. I mean, he's been hitting second in that order quite a bit, which I guess is more of a base stealing spot in the order, but not a guy that's had even good base stealing numbers in the past for the most part. But I mean, he's on pace for, I think, 31 stolen bases right now, which is just insane for a first baseman. I mean, he just adds that little bit of extra value like Goldschmidt does, where we've seen Goldschmidt kind of put up 10, 15 stolen bases every now and then. He's got 6 on the year. I mean, having that stolen base upside along with the massive power runs, RBIs upside from those two guys is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, Dee Gordon only has 12 stolen bases.
Right, that's what I mean. 9 stolen bases is insane for a first baseman. It's just absolutely insane. Yep. He's got more stolen bases than home runs, and that's with a 246 ISO right now. I mean, he has massive upside, and he's still getting underplayed nightly. Yep. And speaking of underplayed, Eric Hosmer still having a fantastic season, hitting 321. Nobody ever plays him. 7 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 30 RBI and 28 runs scored. I mean, he's just having a rock-solid all-around season.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another guy who's really starting to get it going, Brandon Belt, up to over 300. I mean, batting average on balls in play over 400. Obviously not going to sustain that, but, I mean, he didn't have a single home run through, the first 6 weeks of the season. They hit 3 for the past week or so. Lucas Duda right behind him, a guy had a double-dong day the other day against the Cardinals. So he's starting to get it going. I mean, he's all power with Duda. I mean, you're obviously paying for his power upside, but hitting 300 now, if he really gets that power stroke going, then he's going to be a force to be reckoned with there for sure.
Yeah, it's all about the power with him. I mean, he's been a really, really solid hitter all season, but his power just disappears for really long stretches where he's just hitting singles, and that's the frustrating part with him. But it also keeps his price down, so it's one of those things that's a little bit of a give and take there, especially daily fantasy-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. Another guy who's starting to get it going, Ryan Howard, somehow up to 257, which has got to be a high score for him ever since getting that big contract. He's been pretty terrible, batting around 220, 230 seems most years. Still striking out a ton, 27%, but up to 9 homers, 21 RBIs. Still a really bad Phillies lineup, and he did have, I think, 1 home run in that Coors series, so that certainly helps. But I mean, it seems like he's seeing the ball pretty well recently, and I mean, if you can get a Ryan Howard batting around 260 with some power, then he's a legitimate tournament option some nights. Whereas early in the season, it was you hope he gets a hold of one during his 3 strikeouts.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's starting to get going. Edwin Encarnacion starting once again doing one of those little streaks. I think he has 5 home runs over his past 8 or 9 games.
Yep.
Up to 10 on the season now. Still just batting 231, but I think you're not paying for batting average with him. You're paying for the upside. He's not going to be a 300 hitter ever again in his career.
Yeah, definitely. Jose Abreu, another guy that hasn't really gotten the power stroke going yet. Only 6 home runs on the season. Hitting 292, so you can't really complain too much. But with the White Sox not putting a ton of guys on base and him not hitting home runs, I mean, his RBI numbers are way down too. Just not a lot to love with him right now, despite the massive upside that we know he has. He still looks great, just isn't in a good situation now, and the home runs haven't been there yet. You got to think those come around at some point, though.
Yep, absolutely. Looking at the bottom here, Carlos Santana is the guy who's still been getting on base a ton with the 19.3% walk rate, but batting just .213. Scored 23 runs, has 21 RBIs, but really not anywhere near what we expected out of him this year. We're expecting him to have a breakout season, bunch of home runs. He's really not showing that at all. Indians were really struggling. They're starting to get it going a little bit here, but I mean, we're going to need to see a lot more out of Santana, especially at his current price tag, especially on DraftKings recently. Been up near 5K a lot of nights. You just can't pay that price tag except for anything but the most elite of matchups.
Right, exactly. That's the tough part there.
Yep, and I'll throw out one more guy there, Michael Morse. Absolutely unplayable. He's been absolutely terrible. I mean, I haven't played him a single time this season, and I'm not going to start now. He's been bad.
Yeah, it makes it really tough to play him. I mean, he just hasn't shown anything really.
Yeah, I mean, if he's not hitting for power, he's not worth a roster spot in my mind. All right, move on here to second base where we talked about D. Gordon, just 3 stolen bases ahead of Anthony Rizzo right now. So he might need to widen that gap, but it's been pretty hard for him right now, especially over the past week, not getting on base at all. He's looking like the D. Gordon of old, the Dodgers D. Gordon that slaps the ball but doesn't get on base, not making a lot of contact. His strikeout rate is still just 12.3%, but over the past week or so it's been really high.
Yep.
So at his current price tag, I mean, he's tough to pay for as well.
Yeah. One guy that's turned it around in the opposite direction, Jason Kipnis, struggled really badly to start the season. He's hitting 327 now with a 170 ISO. 4 home runs, 5 stolen bases. Still needs to pick it up in both of those categories a little bit, but the fact that he's actually getting on base, hitting the ball hard now is a lot better than it was early in the season. Brandon Phillips, he's still hitting over 300, 314, 2 home runs, 5 stolen bases. He's looked really good so far this season, but looks like a totally different hitter than he's been in the entire rest of his career.
Yeah. I mean, now I think he's realizing that power is not there. He's just trying to make the plays where he can, and he's been moved around in that batting order. Reds have had some struggles with, especially the leadoff spot. So hopefully he keeps it going. But some other guys. Colton Wong is the guy who's kind of come out of nowhere. He's a guy who showed some big time upside last season. Up to 5 homers and 22 RBIs now. One of the many Cardinals, seems like Cardinals and Royals bats, just because there's no huge names, nobody having monster seasons. All these guys having good seasons, just kind of going under the radar. But Colton Wong, I mean, having a really good time right now, and he's not that expensive on most sites. So I think he's, especially when he's batting second, he's a great play a lot of nights.
Yep, definitely.
Jose Altuve, we'll mention him for a second. He's great. He's only batting 306 now, but I mean, that's bad for Jose Altuve. I mean, it's disappointing. He was batting 350 for a while, so we'll cut him some slack over the past week or two with him struggling just a little bit, but got to think that Jose Altuve gets it going once again.
The good thing about him, and basically with D. Gordon too, is when the bat comes around, his stolen bases come around too. And so, like, when you get a guy that has a nice game like that from one of those guys, I mean, you're having a really nice game is what it is. So they make, even when they're struggling, they make great GPP plays. But Altuve is going to come around for sure. D. Gordon, I'm not so sure about because he doesn't have the same history that Altuve does.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's our big moment, the Chase Utley moment with the WRC Plus. He was negative for a while. I believe he was at, what was it last week, 8? Something like that?
I don't even know if it was that high. I think it might have been like 3 last week.
Yeah, it was barely above 0. But after this pretty solid week he had, thanks to Coors Field and Mother Nature, up to 42 WRC Plus. So watch out, Stephen Drew. He's coming for you here with that 42. Stephen Drew, we know, terrible, but maybe Chase Utley gets it going. I mean, you don't expect a monster season out of him at this point in his career, but maybe that was the boost he needed to get some confidence, and he's still pretty cheap everywhere. So I wish he would be back in Coors Field more often, but obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it definitely makes it tough.
And we'll talk for a minute about a guy we talk about on the podcast all the time, Robinson Cano. He's not having a bad season necessarily if his name wasn't Robinson Cano at 264 batting average, .092 ISO and a 290 WOBA. It's just embarrassing for the type of hitter that we know he is. Not showing any upside, not getting on base a lot. I mean, his price is still pretty low on FanDuel, but I mean, you can't even really play him on DraftKings. I mean, he's not even a guy you want to target much in tournaments the way he's hitting.
Yeah, it makes it really tough. I mean, it just doesn't even feel like there's any upside right now.
Yeah, I mean it's bad with him. So that was the obligatory remark. We had to talk about him because we always do. Your leading shortstop as far as average goes is Mr. Freddie Galvis for the Phillies, batting .319. Obviously not much power. You know that he's not a power hitter. .337 WOBA. He's got 5 stolen bases on the year. You got to like that. And then right behind him, one of the hottest hitters in the game right now, Brandon Crawford, really been getting it going. Up to a .303 average. He's got a .212 ISO, 6 homers, 27 RBIs now quietly, leading all shortstops. Actually, by far, Starlin Castro has 23. No one else even at 20. So, or I'm sorry, Peralta and Hechavarria both have 20, but still, 27 for Brandon Crawford. A lot of those have come in the past week and a half. So you gotta love his upside right now.
Yeah, you mentioned Peralta, another guy that's really come around, has been absolutely crushing lefties. Has looked really good, up to .296 on the season. Still striking out quite a bit, but I mean, there's a lot of these shortstops that are striking out quite a bit, so it's hard to hold that against him when he's got 40 runs in RBI total, 6 home runs on the year.
Yeah, I mean, well, next we'll talk about Troy Tulowitzki since he's right there, and reluctantly so because he's been awful. Just 2 home runs on the season. Seems like it's been 2 for about a month now. I think it actually has been about a month since he's hit a home run. ISO just 153. His walk rate's what's really concerning. 2.9% tells you he's just not seeing the ball well. Striking out nearly 10 times as much as he's walking. I mean, his price isn't indicative of his performance. It's more based on name recognition. And even in recent games in Coors, I mean, he had a double a couple games ago. I see 2-run double. I wasn't watching the game. I see it on the game cast or the stat cast or whatever it was. And then I'm talking to someone about the game. I was like, well, hey, Tulo got a 2-run double, thinking that, he's starting to get it going. But coming to find out it was a little blue pit that fell in between Ryan Howard and Jeff Francoeur, neither of which are known for their speed or fielding prowess. So it seems like the type of hit that anyone could get. So I mean, it's tough, even at Coors, until I see at least a home run or a 3-hit game or something. He's just so hard to play right now.
Yeah, a guy that's not that hard to play right now is Brad Miller against lefties. He's having a really nice year.
Yeah.
And against lefties, his splits are pretty big. He struggles a little bit against righties, hits further down in the lineup, but 5 home runs, 3 stolen bases on the year. He's a guy that, with that power at shortstop, comes at a 20% strikeout rate that he sports. And while we're talking about strikeout rates, let's talk about Ian Desmond, who's looked pretty good lately, hitting higher up in the order, but has a 25% strikeout rate. So there's a lot of shortstops striking out a ton right now. I like both of these guys in the right matchup at this point. You're getting a pretty good deal on them. They're not going to be very heavily owned because they do struggle against some good pitchers, but it gives them a lot of upside against weaker pitchers.
Yeah, absolutely. Another guy I like to play recently, he's been getting some spots in the 6 or 7 hole, which I don't like, but when he's batting second, I like him a lot. Andrelton Simmons, guy who puts the ball in play a lot. Strikeout rate is just 7.8%, by far the lowest among shortstops. Alcides Escobar, the only other guy close. And he's batting .253, 3 homers, 17 RBIs, but you got to love that he scored 29 runs for a Braves offense, and he's quiet. I mean, goes under the radar, makes for great cash game plays a lot of nights.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier that the batting average on balls in play, league average, is .311. He's only at .261 right now for a guy putting the ball in play that much. I mean, you got to think that bumps up a little bit. His average comes with it. He has that little bit of power with 3 home runs. I think he's going to be a guy that's a really strong play the rest of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at the bottom here, Jimmy Rollins, always enticing with that price tag, and he does walk a fair amount, but that's about all he's doing. I mean, he does have 4 homers on the year. I think 3 of those came in April, though, so hasn't been a whole lot recently. And his batting average of balls in play, .214, batting .197. I mean, not a lot to like other than the fact that he's high in that Dodgers order.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's still only scored 19 runs hitting at the top of that order, but I mean, he's just not getting on base enough. I mean, his on-base percentage is .279 right now. Like you said, he's walking a lot, but if he was hitting .250 and walking that much, I mean, he'd be in great shape. He'd probably have 27, 30 runs scored, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe he gets it going. Maybe he doesn't. Who knows? It's later on in his career. This could be the beginning of the end for him. Moving on to third base, Mike Moustakas, by far leading all third basemen in batting average at .342. Sporting a nice 161 ISO as well. He's got a 4.8% walk rate, which you don't love, but only a 9% strikeout rate. He's hitting the ball. He's putting it in play. That's what you really like out of cash game play, so he still makes for a great cash game play, batting second there. Escobar is a guy that's just okay. Doesn't really have any power. Had 2 5-hit games, kind of boosting his average there. It's up to 326. But the guy who's really starting to get it going, I know we're all excited about it. Chris Bryant, up to 289. His BABIP's huge at 406. But now up to 193 ISO. It's been slowly creeping up. Hit a home run in San Diego the other day. Up to 27 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, walking 17% of the time. So Chris Bryant really starting to become the player we knew he was going to be, and it didn't take him that long.
Yeah, definitely. Feels like a really strong play most of the time. Speaking of guys who feel like a really strong play most of the time, Josh Donaldson against the lefty feels like an auto play at this point. I can't remember the last time he didn't hit a home run when he faced a poor lefty.
He almost hit 2 last time.
I know. He's just been automatic basically against lefties. I can't believe his ownership percentages have stayed around 25% against guys like that. I mean, I know baseball, there aren't like must plays, but he's about as close as it gets when he's facing a lefty that's not like Chris Sale or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's just absolutely destroying lefties as he has throughout his whole career.
Yep.
A couple more guys. Nolan Arenado, still a ton of power. You obviously love him when he's at home. Batting 270, 234 ISO. He's a great play. And as we're talking about guys who hit lefties, Trevor Plouffe crushes lefties. Whole Minnesota lineup crushing lefties right now. And he's shown a lot of patience, too. 12.2% walk rate, 6 homers, 20 RBIs in the season. And then a little bit below him, Todd Frazier, ton of power. He's not hitting for a good average at 252, but his batting average of balls in play just 231. And especially against right-handed pitching at home, just tons of power there. 6 stolen bases, 12 homers for him.
Yep, definitely.
All right, as we look here at the bottom of third base, there's a couple surprising names, but not really. I mean, David Freese is a guy who's been destroying lefties but not touching righties. 233 batting average. Been batting around the heart of that order and against lefties. He does have 8 homers and 25 RBI this season. But all these hitters really struggling against righties for the Angels. Got to think he gets it going there. And, his peripheral numbers outside of the batting average are actually pretty good. I mean, 207 ISO you got to like. And then you've got another guy, similar numbers there, Luis Valbuena, up over 200 finally, but he's got 10 home runs, only 16 RBIs, mostly because he's been batting second, haven't been a lot of guys on base for him. But 238 ISO makes him a great tournament play more often than not. Outside of third base, we'll go ahead and look over here to the outfield, where, as always, there's a lot of guys to talk about here. There's some big names that are struggling, some big names that are doing great. And we're going to go ahead and start off. Despite him not leading the league in batting average, we're going to talk first about Bryce Harper because the guy is just a man possessed right now. I mean, you're scared of him when you're pitching. Apparently umpires are scared of him too, throwing him out pretty instantly, even though I don't know, looked to me like he'd already mouthed off a little bit, dug back in. Doesn't matter. I mean, 21% walk rate right now. He is striking out 23% of the time, but that's telling you that he's either putting the ball in play or walking. I mean, 77% of the time, which is pretty damn impressive. 15 homers, 38 RBIs, 37 runs scored. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying what this guy's doing right now. We're seeing him hit home runs basically out of the dirt. I mean, it's ridiculous. He's the best hitter in the game right now, if you ask me. I don't even think it's that close. Nelson Cruz barely holding on to his lead in the home runs now at 16. Looks like Bryce Harper might have hit 16 and 17 while we're talking here, so stay tuned for that. Maybe he's passed him up. But right below them is Adam Jones, who got off to a really, really hot start of the season, but has been really cold actually over the past month, despite still batting .333.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Harper, like you mentioned, the fact that he's 20+% in strikeout and walk rate is one of the things that makes Chris Bryant so scary because his numbers look almost identical to that.
Good point.
And if he gets that power stroke going, like you mentioned, after hitting that home run in San Diego the other day, I mean, we could see a really similar explosion from him at some point this summer too. Like you said, Adam Jones has been struggling a little bit. Only 6 home runs on the season. I think he hit, 5 in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So his power has been down a little bit. His ISO stayed up there around 200. He's at 190 right now. You got to think he'll come back around. And, I mean, he might not even hit 333 the whole season, but I'm expecting the power to be there at some point. Another guy that hasn't had much power but has been just mashing the ball lately is Matt Holliday. He's looked a lot like Prince Fielder did early in the season. He's hitting 387 over the last 12 games here. He's up to 328 on the season. Another guy with a big walk rate, 16.4%, identical to his strikeout rate. A guy that I expected to see more power from, so I think it's going to come around at some point. He's sitting in the middle of a really strong order with the Cardinals. I mean, people don't consider the Cardinals when they're stacking right now, but they've been scoring a ton of runs lately with just everyone hitting. And, I mean, you got to think Holiday starts hitting some home runs and putting some big numbers on the board. He's got 23 RBI and just 3 home runs at this point, with Matt Carpenter hitting in front of him and basically the entire Cardinals offense playing well right now.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Carpenter's been hitting too many home runs. There's none left for Matt Holliday to have there. I think he's got 6 now in the season.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, strangely enough, he's showing the power we thought that Matt Holliday had.
Yep.
So at least one of the Matts getting the power upside there. Outside of that, looking at some guys here around that Mike Trout area, some interesting options here. You've got Jake Marisnick, who's batting .289. He's having himself a pretty nice year. 9 stolen bases, 3 homers, 16 RBIs, 17 runs. He's been interesting. Justin Upton's been quietly having a good game. Nobody really talks about him, but he's at 11 homers, 9 steals, 29 RBIs, 30 runs scored, batting .285. So yep. He's an interesting guy that, of course you prefer him against a lefty because he destroys lefties. But, I mean, despite hitting in Petco, I mean, the guy's having a really, really fine season.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been really impressive so far. Another guy that has been struggling a little bit more lately that we mentioned on this podcast a lot of times, Lorenzo Cain. He hasn't been hitting quite at the same clip he was early in the year. He's down to 306 right now, but 29 runs scored on the year is really strong. He's up to 7 stolen bases. He looks like a solid play most nights still. A lot of people have been talking about Mike Trout versus Bryce Harper. Trout's having a fine year, just not what you expect from Trout so far. Only .295. But 33 runs scored, 22 RBIs, 11 home runs, 7 stolen bases. It's awfully hard to complain about that.
Yeah.
But everyone is. So
if it were any 2 players not with those 2 names, you compare the 2 and you're like, wow, they're both having good years. But
yeah, right.
It's like that ongoing battle where everyone was mad at Bryce Harper for not being Mike Trout right away, and now everyone's mad at Mike Trout for not being Bryce Harper.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, he's having such a nice year. 33 runs scored, I believe, is tops in the league behind Harper, right? I think he's the only person that...
I think so. Yeah, I don't think we've seen anyone that's higher than 33, so I think it's those 2, which is kind of what we expected a couple years ago when these guys came up.
Yeah, especially the fact that the Angels' offense isn't hitting at all around him, and he scored 33 runs. I mean, he could be having a massive year in runs if they were hitting around him. I mean, we're looking at guys like Pujols, who we didn't even really mention as a cold hitter, but he's been just not cold enough to stay out of the bottom of the barrel there. I think he's got 7 home runs on the year, and he's hitting about .230, right behind Trout. Cole Calhoun is having an okay year. He's hitting .292 with only 4 home runs. Hasn't been doing anything really impressive. You mentioned a couple of these Padres guys. I mean, Will Myers at .291, Upton at .285. I mean, these guys are having really nice seasons for the Padres in that ballpark. I saw a couple things come out the other day that they have the most home runs per game right now they've ever had at that ballpark, which is probably because they have by far the best lineup they've ever had since they moved into that ballpark. I don't even think it's close. Yeah.
I mean, the only other really good hitter they had there since that ballpark has been Adrian Gonzalez.
Yeah, he wasn't even there that long either.
Yeah, just a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, that's crazy, especially how big that park is. Speaking of big ballparks and guys who are not hitting, Carlos Gonzalez, second worst among all qualified hitters with a 200 average, outfield only, of course. But just a 131 ISO. He has 4 home runs, but it seems like every time you click on his name, he's still sitting at 4 home runs. He has been for quite a while. Batting average on balls in play just 232. I mean, he's not hitting the ball well. He's striking out 22% of the time. Just not a lot to like, but I mean, he's still a guy you keep coming back to in cores, and it's hard not to because we know what he's capable of. Just hasn't been producing. It's been a struggle. Same thing for Jay Bruce. At least he has 7 homers and 19 RBIs. A little bit higher of an ISO, 195, but also striking out a ton. But you kind of expect that out of Jay Bruce. You know he strikes out a ton. 195 isn't what you expect him to hit. You hope he's around 240, 250. But yeah, both those guys had high hopes coming into this year, and neither one producing at all.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, that's going to wrap things up. Hopefully we helped you out a little bit. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe, and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com. and we will catch you guys on Monday.